As time moves forward, as technology changes and grows, as the infrastructure of companies continue to ebb and flow, one thing remains the same. A leader has to produce. This is the Mosley Method Mastering Leadership Podcast, a transformational leadership approach that's centered around three core concepts: vulnerability, transparency, and authenticity. On this show, you'll learn how to be open and honest with yourself and with others, while also developing trust, empathy, and respect within your team. You'll learn how to empower them to take ownership of their roles and responsibilities. This is the Mosley Method Mastering Leadership Podcast. And now your host, Edward E. Mosley Jr.
Hello, everybody, once again to another exciting episode of the Mosley Method Mastering Leadership Podcast. And we are here with the exciting, I'm trying to think of the word I want to use from when you hear his bio and hear things that he's done, it's very exciting. So I want to say we're here with the exciting, extraordinary guest, Doug Thompson, and we're going to bring him in. So, Doug, when you come in, you got to tell us a little bit about yourself. Tell us a little bit about what do you think leadership is and what do you see it going in the future? So without further ado, Doug, your show. Let's go.
Sure. With the exciting, you say it's just the Doug Thompson, because anybody can be a Doug Thompson. So I like being the, it's something to strive for. And I claimed all those things early on. So thanks for having me on the show here. My view of leadership is, it's not about me as a leader. It's never about me. It's about the people or the team that I want to help achieve a certain goal, whatever it is. I've never sought out leadership per se, but I'm not afraid to jump in and go ahead and take that open or take that option to go do that. I love leading. I love leading a team, but it starts from within. It's a servant type attitude to have. That's the way I approach it, is how can I serve my team to go ahead and achieve whatever goal that we put in front of us to go do that. So that's my view on leadership. It's you mentioned in your intro, the vulnerability, the transparency, all those are key items that I try to focus with my life, and do that from a lead, not just from day to day, not even in a leadership perspective.
Yeah, I thank you for that. One of the things that I tried to do, and the whole reason why I started the podcast was going through so many, been the recipient of so many, let's just call them bad leaders. Or I would say managers that were promoted or advanced to leaders. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that we do know is there is a difference between management and leadership. They have two different roles, but for this last 30, 40, 50 years or so, we've got it so kind of correlated and integrated so we don't see the difference, Mm-hmm. And one of the things that we have also seen is that the traditional structure, the traditional framework doesn't work anymore. And we are not having employees to stay with us for 30, 40 or so years. And so to promote, advance, or, elevate a manager or supervisor based on loyalty to the organization, it's not working anymore. So, how do we move forward? How does an organization become flexible? And I'm going somewhere with this. We're going to get back to your posters behind you, but
right.
How does that, as a leader of an organization, mm-hmm. How do you manage that?
Yeah, I've worked for large corporations. I mean, I worked for Microsoft for 20 years. I've moved over to a smaller one. It's actually smaller than the group I worked with at Microsoft. But, the best thing that I can say, when they start developing leaders, not managers, as you said, there's a big difference between the two, is developing and looking for leadership skills in individuals and helping them develop them. Because a lot of times it's like me. I didn't realize I had a lot of lead. I wouldn't put a name on it. I just knew that when I would go in their room and we'd be on a team, like when I went to a jury, we were on a trial. Somehow I ended up as foreman.
Yeah.
I was just like,
Yeah.
how does that happen? It's like, is there some type of magic or something that goes on? And it's your day to day, the way you show up every day and your interactions and the way that you deliver on what you promise you're going to deliver, and then helping others, more importantly, helping others along the way. There was a book, Tim Ferriss wrote a book, Tribe of Mentors. And in there, he had a chapter on Terry Laughlin, who came up with this total immersion swimming. So that ties into the posters behind me. But he had a quote. He says, we're all on this road to mastery. And that's why I like this podcast too. We're all on this road to mastery, and we're all going to die before we get there, somewhere. It's all on this road because there's always more to learn. And right, our responsibility, I'll add this piece of that. I take as my responsibility is to look for people in front of me and ask for help, or, try to engage and learn from them. And those behind me offer and help grow them, right? Help them deliver that. Because it's not a contest. We're all on this road. Nobody's going to ever be the master of everything, because there's always more to learn. And it's how do you sort of navigate that road and learn from those in front of you? I'm a sponge. I do a lot of shadow mentoring, if you will, where I'm just watching people and I'll learn and I'll learn about their life and all that. You can absorb it that way. It's not a formal relationship, but then also really reaching out to those behind me. And what's funny is I will learn something from those that are behind me on a specific skill set, because they maybe have a different skill in something else, especially when I've got in these corporations, we bring in new hires from colleges and stuff, and they're way smarter than I am from a book perspective. But I've got a few miles on me, as my dad used to say. And how do I help sort of share that with them to help them mature? But I also then learn that perspective that they have from that younger point of view. They have different experiences. What can I pull from that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a really good point. And to me, everything that you have said has been completely about vulnerability. And the reason I wanted to bring that up was I read in your bio that you've ran some triathlons.
Couple.
And one is more than me. and in that, I'm assuming there's at least 50 people, 100 people.
When you get to do these Ironman, there's like 2,300 of your closest friends.
Right. But with that being said, the leader, the winner, I would say the ultimate winner, may not have ultimately started from the front. They could have been in the second group, third group, or whatever, but they made it through all of the trials, the emotional piece, the physical piece, the mental piece. And I'm assuming, let me ask you a question. Is it safe to assume that on that journey of triathlon, you are taking and you're watching and you're looking at the other runners and everything that's going on to help you push, or you see something that they're doing that you don't want to fall in, that you go through? So how does that mental piece, as running and being in the triathlon, an Ironman, how does that work in leadership?
Yeah, my original goal. So I'm never one of those that are off the front of the pack. I'm a rather large guy to go on, and I'm more like a diesel truck rather than a Ferrari, and that it takes me a while to get up to speed, but once I get there, I can cruise for a long time. But to your point, the watch and me, the previous version of me, or the last time I did the race, that's where a lot of the battle comes from. But I will use those external resources or things to help drive me forward. Yeah. Like watching, okay, if I can pass one of my, and I sort of keep some math in my head when I get to each leg, how many people pass me versus how many did I pass? I'm looking for that to be a positive number moving forward. So it's perspective from that standpoint. But it's also, there's only one triathlon that I didn't finish out of all the over 100 races that I've done. And there's one that I didn't finish. And it was because I ended up in the ER. It was up in Washington, and it was cold and my feet were frozen, and I ended up cutting a toe. And I get into transition, changing off the bike to run. I get in transition, I look, and I'm like drying off my feet, and I turn my foot over to the side, and I can see there's a big gash, and I can see the tendon moving back and forth. And there for a minute, the adrenaline was running. I said, it's only a 10K. I can probably run 6 miles and not bleed out. So I started to put my shoe on, and I said, no, I got to back off and do that. So as they say, you know, pain's temporary, but quitting's forever. And I set my mind to go do these things, and I will do it. Some days are rougher than others. I'll be honest with you. But from a leadership perspective, same thing. Because when you're leading, you will have setbacks.
Yeah.
You will have things that don't, you know, a plan, being from the military, you know that a battle plan works great until you engage the enemy. You know, they get a vote too. So how do you adapt from that standpoint? Always being on there and looking for the big picture. That's where one of my strength is. I'm one of those big picture guys. And so as we're on this journey to accomplish a task, right? We're on a team doing something, you know, a new product coming out or a new launch. And over the period of months, we're looking at, and you know, I'm looking much like sailing. I like sailing too. Is I'm going to pick a point across the pond where we're going to launch. That's where we're going to go. That's swimming is way in the Ironman as well. I'm picking something off in the distance. That's my target. And realizing along the way, I'm going to vary. I'm going to go off to the left. I'm going to go off to the right. There's going to be storms. There's going to be waves. There's going to be things that set me back. But I can always look up and say, okay, here's where we're going, guys, and just regroup and do that. And again, it's simply. We're capable, the human is capable of so much more than what we think we can. And, you know, you being a Marine, you went through some boot camp and stuff that, you know, that is unimaginable to me. You know, my grandson just went through Coast Guard boot camp about a year ago. And some of the stuff he told me he went through, I said, look, you are the man now. You know, an Ironman is nothing compared to what you went through. But he was not going to quit. He went through it and he learned a lot and he came out better on the other side.
Yeah, one of the things that I remember for me was it is entirely a mental process. Because there were so many. My entire platoon came from various different locations, and some of them, you know, some had never seen, you know, other races before. Mm-hmm. You know, some had never, you know, various people from different locations, you know. Different beliefs, different biases, and to go through that 12 weeks of boot camp and it brought you almost from a place where you had to transform. Mm-hmm. And I go back on a lot of those and a lot of the history that I went through the military of this transformation. You know, I was this person before I went to boot camp, and then as I went into boot camp, you learn various, you know, perspectives, as you talked about the different perspectives, and then you look at it and you kind of give it like, you know, I don't have the only perspective, but what is the common goal? You know, what is the common theme? Where can we all join and have one theme and we all succeed? And, you know, I kind of started this podcast out of the perspective of leadership in chaos, and went through some personal, you know, things in my life, and you still have to kind of move forward, you know. And even though, like you said, you don't want to get up sometime, you don't want to stop, because if you stop, then you're setting a whole different tone. Mm-hmm. But to continue moving forward through all the struggles and trials, you know, I equate that to leadership in chaos. Mm-hmm. And so I try to also look at things as, what can I do repeatedly and systemically and sustain the forward progress? And I think that's very important, because one of the things I see a lot is a lot of leaders or aspiring leaders, they have all the qualifications, they have the book smarts, but they always seem to second guess themselves and they get stuck. Mm-hmm. They get stuck in this place of where it's like they're sabotaging their own selves. And I find that quite often. And, you know, I try to tell them this, you know, I know you like the storytelling, and I love it as well. And I try to kind of bring them in a place of, when I was a corporal in the Marine Corps, I had the unique, the responsibility of driving the battalion commander and the sergeant major in this Humvee vehicle across a landmine field. Now I'm 24 years old. Yeah. Now, of course, the engineers had kind of went through and gave us a path to drive down, but, you know, any veer right, veer left, could have been catastrophic.
Right.
Now, my commander was this hard-faced, he chewed red man, and big wad in his mouth, and he was like this Clint Eastwood type structure.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
he would say stuff while I'm driving, like, just go left. Why don't you go to the left? But I'm like, wait a minute, So in your past, in working with the various organizations you work with, talk more about the personal attachment, the emotional attachment that leaders have, that some of them tend to lead in a silo because they try to detach from the struggle or the hurt that they could potentially cause.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, because I've been that leader, not necessarily that one, but in leadership roles that I've had. And I'll use an example. I was charged with creating this worldwide training for a launch of a new operating system at Microsoft. And we were training our OEMs, which are the ones that make the manufacture the computers, the Dells, the HPs, and this was a worldwide. And I had two peers that were in other countries. I had one in Germany and one in Japan that were responsible for sort of their area. This was going to be like a 4-stop thing. It didn't sound very big, but this is the launch. This is where you're training the OEMs to put Windows on their systems. And, this is a very high, if you don't do this well, then shipments are going to be delayed. Everything else is going to be bad. It's just going to be a bad experience. And so when I got to do that, and it kept struggling, and I talk about it in my TED talk, that you talked about, that I stopped believing in myself. There were several times along the way where I got in that panic mode. I hadn't met a milestone or something that I thought something went off. I wasn't getting the information that I needed, or commitment from the product team to come in and go do this. And I'm like, I don't belong here. It's a self-doubt that you get in. You don't mentioned it earlier. And I had to sit down, and I know myself now. This will still come up I call it the inner bully. So this will still come up from time to time. It's like when I changed jobs going from Microsoft to here. Look, I'm a 60-year-old. I'm trying to get to a new job when most people are retiring in tech. What do I have? How can I do this? I'm too old to do this. All those negative things that come in your mind. And I have to sit there, and I know it takes me a few days to process that, to get out of the pity pool, to go on and process all the different things that's going on. I know that. I know that this is coming up, and I've got to go ahead and come to terms with that. And then, then it's like, okay, fine. What are you going to do about it? Start talking, prove that I can't do this. Talking to the inner bully. I call mine Simon. On my TED talk, I talk about this inner bully. And I said, prove that I can't do this. Where in the past have I failed on trying to do something that went on?
Mm-hmm.
And as you find, you start putting, I call it putting back in the cage. You learn the tactics that inner voice and the doubt and everything that comes into play does. And you can't show this. I mean, sometimes it's actually good that, when you're talking, I did have people along the way say, look, man, I was up front with the guy, said, look, I'm struggling here. Yeah. I'm not sure what's going on. There's all these other things going on. And one of my manager at the time, he was a good leader, said, give it the weekend. If you after the weekend, if you want to come back and you can't, I understand. He did it before. And I said, so I sat down and went through the process, did the other things, and came back and said, we're going. I came back, and you have to sort of, I don't know if it's like in a little bit of recovery, like when you're training for an Ironman, getting to the starting line and healthy is the hardest part. Mm-hmm. Because you're showing up every day to train, and you look back and you've done hundreds of miles of running, thousands of miles of biking, many, many miles of swimming over the course of 6 months of training, and you're showing up there and you're healthy. Now you've got 17 hours to finish, which, the elites, the pros, they'll be done in about 8 hours. They've taken a nap, showered, gone for another run by the time I'm crossing the finish line. But my first race, it was in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. It was the first year they ran the Ironman, and I'd been training in Seattle at the time during the summer, and it was like 75 degrees. I mean, perfect training weather. Mm-hmm. It was 100 degrees at part of the race, and the pros were dropping out, people were dropping out. I got to a point on the bike ride where, nothing that I'd planned to eat or whatever, it was working because it all tasted good at 70, but it was inedible
Yeah.
at that. And I got to a point where I'm climbing this hill about 70 miles into the bike, and I get to the top, and the aid worker there says, "How you feeling?" I said, "Well, I'm not feeling so good." And he says, "Well, that's odd. You don't look too good either. Here, have
Yeah.
have a seat in the chair here." And he gave me a frozen banana. And this is that inner bully. Look, you
Mhm.
did pretty good for an old fat guy, right? You should be proud of what you accomplished at this point. There's no harm in quitting. And I sat there and I said, "Look, I can't live with myself if I quit.
Yeah.
I cannot." So I got back on, went, and I learned that if I push through that, again, the mental piece you were talking about, if I push through that, there will be a time when I get to the other side, and then, I can go on. It's like a second wind or whatever you want to call it. But it is it's a mental game your entire life. And you can either choose to level up as you go along, learn that, hey, it's not going to be a straight up path. It's going to be, you're going to go up, you're going to go down, you're going to go up, you're going to go down, but it's always get up. We'll do a little Luke Skywalker,
Yeah.
always get up, always get up. And that's
Yeah.
a good leader will do that, because a leader will fail on occasions, let you know it. Hey, let's regroup and go.
But I think that's a really, really vital point. They will let you know it.
Mhm.
And I think when I look back over some of the, various CEOs and of the various companies, I believe Microsoft. What was her name? Did they? What was this? Oh man, I know I messed. I believe it was Microsoft. But where I'm going with this is that CEO changed the entire trajectory of the culture.
That would be
And
Satya. That's the current
yeah,
CEO they
that's
have
it.
there.
Yep.
Satya Nadella.
Yeah. Changed the entire culture. And when you see leaders like that, it
Mhm.
makes you want to be a part of the culture.
Mhm.
And what I have seemed to notice was great leaders, and that's where I want to go with this. Great leaders seem to have a way of being able to storytell. And your
Mhm.
TEDx talk was on the art. Hold up, I got it. The most important story you will ever tell.
Right.
So tell us the art of storytelling was a great book I read, but
Mhm.
why is that so important? I know it's communication. I know it's verbal, nonverbal, but why is that so important for great leaders to have that characteristic?
Yeah, of all things, because it hits everybody,
Yeah.
and sometimes you have to sort of change the flavor of the story a little bit, but the science behind it, as I start my TED talk, I talk about the science, is that stories impact the brain. We're wired to learn from stories. If you go back to the caveman days, even stories before we had words, you painted pictures on the wall, and we could relate to that. And it lights up different areas of the brain. And the more areas that you light up, the better you are about recalling these things and learning from them. And that's why, like, I sell technology, and I have to talk to a whole bunch of different people that may not that usually don't even understand the technology piece of it. They have a business problem they need to solve, and I work with them to tell the story on how this will help solve it. I don't get into the ones and zeros. I don't get down into the weeds and stuff on that. I'm working with telling them a story, usually relating it to something that we have in common or I understand. Maybe they play
Mhm.
golf, right? Or maybe, again, you were in the Marines. Maybe there's a military story that I heard from
Yeah.
one of my friends that was there. But something to give you a frame of reference to help carry you along, because we like watching movies. If you're reading a book, you're playing a movie in your head.
Mhm.
As you're telling yourself that you can't do this, you're playing a video in your head, right? That's going on. So you have to be able to just frame that as a story. And if you compare what Satya's, he's a very meek individual from
Mhm.
that, but very, very humble, very vulnerable and it's a cultural thing, I think, more than anything else.
Yeah.
But just as opposed to Steve Ballmer, who now owns the Kings and stuff, and he was bombastic going around. They both told stories, but the ones that Satya tell are more vulnerable. They're
Mhm.
more, Steve could give you a good halftime talk, but Satya sort of gave this overall strategy as a vulnerable leader, and you wanted to follow him.
Yeah.
You wanted to do that. So, I mean, that's the universal language, as you mentioned on that. The storytelling piece of that, all the good leaders that I've ever worked for or worked with have been the best storytellers that I've seen. And they didn't really, one of the things is they do it unconsciously.
Yeah.
It's how they relate to people. That's the way that they talk.
Yeah. And what I do is I know there's three type of people in the room. There's a pathos, lothos, and ethos. And I try to find those people in the room. And one of I bombed. I told Tara this one time. I said I was on stage and I had 20 minutes. I was one of the keynotes, and I had a certain portion, and it was an entrepreneurial seminar. Had a bunch of vendors there, and my job was to tell them about my business, but talk to them about coaching. And 15 minutes into the 20 minutes, I get this sign from the young lady standing in front of me, who's giving me my signal, and she says, the sign says you have 5 minutes, wrap it up.
Yeah.
Doug, I had never even got into the meat of my entire topic. I was so and I knew it. I wasn't comfortable on the stage. I had paper here and I had the microphone here, and I was very uncomfortable. I got off the stage and I could tell that I didn't do good.
Yeah.
Because I never connected to the audience.
Right.
I never connected, and I never told a story, or I never got engaged with them, and they didn't get engaged with me. And I went home and I went into this redirect, reassess mode of how I spoke in my presentations. And I looked at the TEDx format. I'm like, okay, if I got 7 minutes, what I'm going to say, you know? And when I did that, I would say maybe about 3-4 months later, I ended up being the keynote for a school district in the area, in this particular area, and they had 600 attendees. And so I get on the stage, but as I'm preparing, I'm like, okay, what's my pain points? What's their pain points? And when I tell you, I went for like my whole purpose was within the first 2 minutes of me talking. I wanted for them to be emotional and attached to what we were talking about. And I played it over and over in my head, And just as I rehearsed it and that repeatedly working it and practicing it, I get on the stage, and within the first 30 seconds, I got them up. They're energized. And within that minute, I was able to ask them a question within this first introduction presentation that made them feel like, and they were all teachers, they were all they were all in the education field. So they were teachers, administrators, cafeteria workers, bus drivers, substitutes, paralegal professionals. So anyone that helps teachers and school administration. And so my simple question to them was, you could be the first and the last person that a student talks to in their life. And I gave them time to breathe that and process that. And then I went even further to say, think about if your attitude, if you get up in the morning and your attitude is down, and you see that student get off the bus, come into the school, and they see your down attitude, what if you're the person that caused that person not to want to live anymore? And it hit them like, whoa, wait a minute. And then from that point on, they were like, on the edge of their seats. They were involved and engaged. And I even coached some of them afterwards. But that was a lesson I had to learn of pure utter failure on the stage. In trying to get a message across, because I thought I had a great message. I just never got to it.
Hey, I don't think it was a failure in that you learned something from it and you got much better at it.
Oh yeah.
Right. And you got back up is what it is. So if you only time fail if you don't get back up. But you're right. A lot of people I see that are really bad at presenting and stuff like that, they spend all the time. You did it just right. You've got about 2 minutes for the audience to decide, are they going to buy into what you're selling, or are they going to be on their phone? You got it's probably even more like a minute and a half. So getting that hook, getting that engagement from them, like you just did. I mean, that's a very heavy one. But it's also something they could relate to because it's true. Sometimes, starting it off with a very stark fact, it's, well, I need to learn more. I hadn't thought of it that way because,
Mhm.
I wouldn't think of it that way when I get up in the
And that's
morning. So,
exactly what happened
yeah.
after the comments that I received was they didn't think about them, they're all adults,
Yeah.
but the impact that their role plays in that elementary, middle school, or high schooler,
Mhm.
even the janitor. I can remember teachers assistants or janitors that would just say something to us in the hallway that would get, hey, y'all need to go to class, don't be doing that.
Yeah.
That has been more impactful. I can remember those people almost more than I can remember my teachers. And when
Yeah.
I put it to them in that perspective of just how they interacted with the students outside of the teachers,
Mhm.
it made them realize how important they were
Mhm.
to our future leaders. And when they saw that and felt that, we had a great time. We had a great
And
time.
they were truly leading by example. They didn't have the title, they didn't
Yep.
have these other things, but they exhibited a behavior that you need to emulate, you need to have,
Yeah.
right, if you're going to be a
Yeah.
great leader. Like for me, I've been a manager a couple times,
Mhm.
hated it because I not only did I have to, I loved the mentoring the people and all that, but you still had to be like an individual contributor. It's the way that
Yeah.
corporations work. So I'm always better when I'm out in front of the customer, out working with them. I found my place. Again, I failed a few times internally, about almost got fired a few times, and
Yeah.
you
I
get
can
in these
relate.
roles which sound really good,
Yeah.
but they don't fit you. I need to be out there working with the customers, talking, learning from them again, then helping those around me do the same thing. Much like, and that's why I love speaking, is because I get out there and you probably saw when you did that talk and you said, you may be the last person, you probably saw a light bulb go off on everybody's head,
Oh yeah.
the imaginary light bulb where they got it. And as a speaker, that's then right? Then you
Yeah.
sort of, this fire starts burning in your chest and you've got them, and it just helps raise your energy and raises their energy. There's a vibe, an unseen energy that it goes between an audience, regardless of the size, and the speaker. And it's that exchange of the energy is what I really love, because that's where
Yeah.
learning happens. That's where lives are changed.
Yeah.
And sometimes you don't know it right at that point in time. Like you said, that janitor may have impacted somebody that is a president somewhere or
Hmm.
something like that. We
Hmm.
don't know. I mean, you have to look back over a time frame of a lifetime to see what what was the thing that sort of kicked this off
Yeah.
and put them on that path.
Yeah. Another point you brought up earlier that you called it interbelief.
Yep.
Um, and I call mine self-discovery.
Okay.
So I've kind of broken leadership in this kind of a pyramid perspective.
Hmm.
And I think it starts from the individual, then it gets into this change management kind of level, and then it becomes strategic.
Hmm.
But I think in order for it to ever get to the change perspective piece or the strategic piece, which is the organizational piece, you have to know yourself.
Yeah.
And what I have found is a lot of people that may be in positions of management or leadership, and we'll use that word kind of general right now. They don't know their self.
Mhm.
They have seen and been taught or heard that this is how you lead. It could be authoritative. It could be, hey, this is what we're supposed to do. They assign tasks and it's gone. And honestly, there is about because my path and my space is leadership,
Mhm.
strategic leadership. And in my learnings, in my academic learning, there is about 12 to 15 various styles of leadership. And I believe we're only kind of focusing on maybe about three or four. And we're now getting into the servant leadership, which that is we've been doing that for years, but it's taken on this new topic and title phenomenon now. And the organizations are struggling with, they're trying to attach servant leadership to spiritual and things of that nature, but
Mhm.
that's not what it really is.
Right.
We're now seeing where we have transformational leadership and so talk a little bit about the importance of knowing yourself and that inner peace, knowing who you are as a person, your goals, your principles, and how you take all of that as a leader and inspire and empower teams, organizations.
Sure. I'll go back to an example before I started at Microsoft. I was working at another company, and I was a contract doing some training and stuff, and they called us in to have they were about to launch Microsoft Me. It was around the 2000 time frame, and they had to work something. They had about 10 speakers or trainers at this time. These were trainers because I was an MCT. I was certified to train on some Microsoft products, and they brought us in, and the leader of the group, he was a unicorn in that typically very technically minded people are not that artistic. He came from Broadway. He did like hair. He did some things like that, but he understood technology, but more importantly, understood the stories and how to connect with an audience. And as we're sitting around doing these role plays during the day, he would stand up and yell at people and do that. I mean, because he's really sort of trying to prepare you for an audience where you have that one guy or whatever that wants to play gotcha, stump the chump, but he wants to pick the best people there. And I was like, but what happened is they had a guy there. I'll call him the professor. So he has this, tweed jacket on with elbow patches, and he's just very polished, and I can appreciate that style. I like that style, very, very much. And I was trying to emulate that, and I was failing miserably. Again, this gets back to knowing yourself.
Mm-hmm.
So the night before the final act, I'm home telling my wife I don't belong here. Again, the inner bully was coming back in and let me know that I don't belong here. Who am I to do this? I'm failing all week. And my wife said, why? And I said, well, I'm trying. That's not you. You've never been something that can stand in here and be poisoned. That you have this energy within you that has to come out. That's your superpower, is connecting with people through the energy exchange that you have. And so I took that to heart. Overnight I said, so I hadn't practiced anything coming into the show we were supposed to do. And so I went just improv. Okay, here's what we need to do. I did it. I am knocking things off the table. I mean, but there's a lot of energy.
Mm-hmm.
And when I left there, I had, we decided to divide. About 4 people left. They couldn't take the pressure. And then, amongst the rest of us, we had a 20 city tour, and I took 5. And I got a call back the next day, and the guy who was leading it said, look, what you did yesterday, you were the best guy there. I waited for that guy to show up all week. He could tell there was something in me that I didn't see. I didn't believe. Because I was trying to be something else. I didn't know myself. So ever since that day, I now listen to me. Again, sometimes I'll get in a role that sounds pretty good, but as I get in there, it's not a good fit. And, I got to find another role. But if you don't know yourself, it's like starting on a trip and you don't know where you're starting from. You know where you're going, but you don't know where you're starting from. It's sort of hard, right? That's a nightmare I used to wake up with when I traveled a lot. I'd wake up, okay, what hotel am I in? Because they all look the same. How am I going to get to where you have these irrational thoughts early in the morning?
Yeah. I think that's really crucial. Because, all the pressures that leaders have, when it comes to performance of the team they're leading, trying to take the overall organization's vision and mission and objectives and time into your team's piece, and you may have various things going on at home in your personal life, and half the time we put those personal things to the side because we have to make sure the job and the employees that we're supervising is performing. Not knowing yourself can be really detrimental and crucial to the organization. And one of the things I've seen when it comes to this this separation of kind of employees and supervisors, or employees and leadership, when organizations start to build this separation, what we've seen is high turnover rates, disengaged employees. I've also noted an increased amount of complaints and grievances, unsatisfied employees, not feeling valued. Talk a little bit about how the leader's perspective or the separation, that's wall of separation, um, why that is so important. I remember an executive, excuse me, that he constantly walked around our entire building. We had four stories, gym in the basement, roughly about 1,200 or so employees. But he was a Philadelphia Eagles fan. And on the back of my chair, I would always hang a Dallas Cowboy jersey because I'm from Dallas, Texas. And he would come around, and I don't know if he knew my name or not, but he would always make reference to, as he was walking to that different department head's office. He would always make reference. Well, the best team in the division is the Eagles. But just for him to be, he made it seem as though we were a team.
Mm-hmm.
And I could understand that he had to make certain decisions that I may not like. But the fact that he noticed that I had a Dallas Cowboy jersey on the back of my chair, and I knew that he was an Eagles fan, it made it seem like we were a team.
Mm-hmm.
So talk a little bit about when organizations kind of build this separation between the workforce and leadership. How vital is that?
I mean, from a separation perspective, I mean, leaders have to be able to make hard decisions. Okay, that's just a fact of life. And in the tech industry, you go through these layoffs that happen all the time,
Mhm.
right? And sometimes they have to go. There's a reorg that goes on. That happened every year at the tech companies I've been at. There's always every year you get a reorg. You never know what's going to happen. There's always sort of that trepidation that comes around that time of year. You never know if your team will be busted up or what'll happen. And your leader or manager at this point in time sometimes have to make some tough decisions, or sometimes they have to do that. And every time that's come up, I've thought about it I've always tried to put myself in their shoes when these things come up. And I said, look, I know that, this is a tough thing for you guys to have to do. I know it wasn't easy to do, either if it was, I knew it ahead of time, my thoughts are with you, regardless of what it is. Right. And if it was afterwards, I said, man, that was tough. And I can't imagine what you had, so I try to empathize. You mentioned empathy earlier, empathize with what they're going through.
Yeah.
Because they're human at the end of the day. Now I've had some cold hearted people that, I've been in sales orgs and you're not making the number, you're out of here. Well, it could have simply been because my biggest customer went bankrupt or something. I mean,
Right.
so there's reasons sometimes out of your control, but to the point where he knew that you were a fan. I mean, he knew that much about you. And that's why as a speaker, I try to connect, and a leader, I try to connect a little bit with each person, even just so I recognize them.
Mm-hmm.
They see me as more than employee 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. They see me as more as an employee in room 220. I am a person, and we all want to be people. We all want to be recognized as a human, and and we're more likely to follow those that do that little bit of personal engagement.
Yeah.
Right? It wasn't much. He probably saw you once and he likes football. I said, well, let me give this guy a hard time.
Right.
Right. And because there's sort of that in sports, you have that camaraderie where we can root for opposite people, yet we can make that connection. There is because we both have a passion for the sport at that point. That's the common ground that goes on. And and you can leverage that to tell those stories to help, again, soften the situation. Hey, we had these layoffs. It was a tough decision that went on. It was nothing about their performance. It was strictly a number, and it's just the way corporations are.
Mm-hmm.
But they're vulnerable. They can tell they're suffering. They're suffering too. The good ones, again, suffer. I've had some bad ones that really didn't care. It was just another number, and we were a step on their way to whatever VP or whatever thing they wanted to do. I would never work for those people again. It was just like, you can connect. There's a connection there, and it's a little bit of humanity that they show you on a day-to-day, shows that they connect, that they know who you are. And sometimes the decisions you make, maybe I wanted to be the best person on this, or to take the lead on this, but if somebody else had that, and sometimes, maybe it's because he's trying to develop the other person. I've been there, done that. That's a skill that I've got. I need to go try to do something else. So he puts me in some place that I'm uncomfortable. I say he, if she, because I've had a lot of female bosses as well, managers as well. But it's a growth opportunity. I don't look at it as being put down anymore. Sometimes I have to sit back. Sometimes it's hard to take because I really wanted to do this, but I'm doing something else. Okay, what can I take out of this that will help me grow as a person? Again, keeping that road to mastery on there. Obviously, there's something in here that they think I can build upon and contribute to the team, right? And do something like that. So it's a perspective. And again, it gets back to knowing yourself, being able to say, that it's okay, I can do this. It's scary, whatever, or being empathizing with the other person. Hey, that's a tough decision, that they had to make. They're human too. Being mad at them is not going to help.
Yeah. And I can imagine, and you brought up a great point. Being in the tech world, with where we are with a lot of the, for instance, transformational coaching is I would say has been within the last 10 years or so has come about.
Right.
We went from authoritative to kind of transactional to autocratic in various forms. So in the tech world, with these new, to me, I think the two hot topics that I've seen is this word innovation and technology, right? And so how do leaders, if we know that innovation and technology is really the drivers of staying ahead of change, or at least being able to strategize about where we need to go in innovation and technology, how should leaders look at that? How should they kind of grasp that understanding of, I can remember in the Marine Corps, we used to have these green notebooks and we had file cabinets and everything was written on the green notebook and you had to file it away. And you had a filing system number. So it went from 1,000 to 10,000 and each 1,000 had a different topic. And so whatever document was signed, if it was on personal actions, that went in the 1,000 file. If it was logistics, that went in the 10,000 file. If it was I don't know, supplies, that was in the 8,000 file. And each of those that broke up into 8,100, 8,200. So with that being said, we're no longer using file cabinets, this big hard, the
hard copy,
actual file cabinet.
Yeah.
And employees may only know that system, but now we're looking at cloud-based stuff. We're looking at sharing folders. We're looking at, everything is in the cloud or some type of tech world space place.
Mm-hmm.
How do we get leaders? First of all, how do we get the leaders to kind of shift? But what I've seen from an HR side is if those employees that have been in place for a long time, if they can't grasp or be retrained, position descriptions are being rewrote, and we don't want to out them based on rewriting a position description. But how do leadership? How do we handle that situation when we talk this innovation? Because if you're innovating, you got to do something tech and structure. So talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, you're always going to have those that just don't want to change and won't go on. There's always sort of a subset of people that do that. And you can't worry about those. You can identify them. You can try to give them things. But what I always try to do, what I find works, and this gets back into when selling technology, I'm solving a business problem. I need to tell the story of what life's going to be like when we get there.
Gotcha.
Right. Take because you hear complain, even if they've been doing 100 years, they're going to complain about X, Y, Z, whatever, right? You talked about the file cabinets and the details and you sort of bring up, what would life be like if you didn't have those things? If it's simply the paper automatically went where it needed to go based off 3 keywords, right? I get into this a lot with AI. AI shouldn't be used to replace people.
Yeah.
It should be used to relieve people of those those very detail-oriented things and free them up to do what humans are capable of doing, which is, thinking about the future and expanding on that, right? And engaging with other people. So I have found that if you tell those stories of what life's going to be like afterwards, the Cowboys and the Eagles will get together and they will be on a super team. And just come up with some scenario where, again, you're connecting with the people based off what we know, painting what this future will look like, and says to do that, we have to let go of the past.
Yeah.
Right. If you're like Tarzan swinging on a vine and he goes up here and he grabs the other vine, if he doesn't let go of the one behind him, he's just stuck. He's not going anywhere. Sometimes you have to trust and let go to take that risk to move on. So, when I moved up from Olympic distance triathlon to Ironman, granted, my mentor, who was a beer salesman, had a lot to do with that story.
Right.
But I said, okay, fine. I let go of that. Now I've signed up for this and I've got to do it. So, get painting. It helps remove some of that fear. It will also help you identify those that just don't want to change. And then you can invest your time and energy on those that do want to change, that want to go on the journey with you. Because ultimately, they're going to also help their peers to do that, because they sort of go in there together. Hey, this is really cool. Can we do this?
Yeah.
Can we help them do this?
Yeah, I think you said, so funny note here. I think of all this, and when you talk AI, I said, let's get into AI, but we don't have time to get into AI.
That's a whole other show.
The first thing that I thought was, I remember watching the cartoon Jetsons.
Yeah.
And it's like, wait a minute, So we'll get into that another time. But when you brought up the word journey, and you brought up the word, to me, it's like it's almost like a calculated risk. But what you did was you started out with telling them a story again of giving them a picture on where we could be. What does it look like in the future? And I think that's great. But and that was the story piece. But the one thing that really got me, with what you just said, was going on the journey together. And I think, again, it goes back into us looking as one organization, like we're not separate. And I think those organizations that really are involved with their employees, those organizations are more successful, rather than, oh, that's the C-suite, or that's their parking space, you can't park over there. I think when you start doing little things like that, it sets a tone in the culture that you are separate, or you're different, and you're not part of what's really going on. So, Doug, I really thank you for coming on the show today. I want to give you the opportunity to do a couple things. Just give us some closing thoughts, some nuggets, a big boulder nugget that the listening audience could take, and also tell us a little bit how we can get in touch with you, how the audience can find you. And I will also get all your information and put it in everything as well. But yeah, just kind of give us a nugget and let us know how we can find you.
Sure. Thanks. And I had a really great time talking with you too, Edward. Yeah. It was a great story. I'll go back to my TED Talk. I'll sort of go back to this thing because it is the most important story that you'll ever tell. So if you want to get in, you think about stories, is that story that you're telling yourself. I think you go back to Thomas the Train. I think I can, or I think I can't, or Henry Ford. You're right, whichever way that you think. So learning how to recognize when that's your inner bully trying to prevent you from moving forward or doing something, or you're scared to do something. Usually the inner bully shows up when you're scared because it's new, it's risky. It's that, you said you had the employee that didn't want to go along, and then tell it, listen to what it's telling you, right? Because it's going to lie to you. And it's really there to protect you. I mean, this developed us when we were running from dinosaurs and bears. We don't run from dinosaurs and bears anymore. So we invent these fears. We invent these things that we can't do something. And you just sit there and you prove it. And the amazing thing will happen when you get to realize that it's a process. You won't ever get rid of it. I don't know anybody that's totally gotten rid of the bully, but you recognize when it's coming on. You have a process of which to go ahead and deal with and turn that conversation around. And then you can get excited about, yeah, you're right, I can do that. What's the next step to do that? And that's the most important story, is that internal story, as Edward mentioned earlier, getting to know yourself. What's the story that you're telling? And then that enables you to reach out and touch the world to go ahead and do that. So that's my, nugget. Go ahead to go forward with. The other thing, I'm the Doug Thompson about everywhere. TheDougThompson.com. I'm on Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn is where I'm most active. I have my own podcast as well, creatively named The Doug Thompson Podcast. But I also, there's one final thing that I will close with. And a friend of mine, a mentor of mine I've been working with, I would talk to him, and every time we would talk, he'd come up with a new business idea. And he'd start doing that. And he got to the point where I gave him so many, he said, he called this, I blame Doug. So, because he came up with a new idea. So I'm going to embracing blame. I'm on a mission now to change the word of blame to something good.
Yeah.
And because I've met, I'm going to blame Edward for having me on to make me a better leader, because he did a really good thing to do that. So that's the best way to reach out to me. Again,
yeah, I love it. And Doug, I did the same thing. I was confusing my own self, because I was my business name, and then I was telling everybody I'm Edward E. Mosley Jr. And I said, you know what? I'm gonna make it easy for me and everybody else. So everything is just Edward E. Mosley Jr.
There you go.
So yeah, it was great having you on the show. I know that there were some things in here that a listening audience will be able to use. And that's why that's why I do this show, is to talk all things leadership, and just, there may be an opportunity where there's a piece of what we talked about today that somebody could use that will help change their life. And so without, going any further, again, thank you for coming on the show, and, just keep doing what you're doing, man.
Thank you.
You've been listening to the Mosley Method Mastering Leadership Podcast. Edward E. Mosley Jr. has 30 years of leadership experience and is an ICF credentialed leadership coach. And it's his passion to inspire leaders who can foster a safe space where they can empower their followers to take ownership of their roles and responsibilities while sparking collaboration and creativity. We hope you've enjoyed the show. If you did, make sure to like, rate, and review. And we'll be back soon. But until then, find us on LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at Edward E. Mosley Jr. To contact the show, send your emails to limitlessboundsteam@gmail.com. See you next time on the Mosley Method Mastering Leadership Podcast.